When a black ICU nurse arrived in court, still in her scrubs after a grueling 12-hour shift, the judge publicly reprimanded her. Yet her retort silenced the entire room, eventually bringing everyone to their feet. Angela Whitman stood at the rear of Courtroom 3B, clad in her faded blue scrubs. Her sneakers, worn from endless pacing across the ICU floor all night, bore the fatigue, and her ponytail sagged wearily to one side. But none of that registered. Her mind replayed the events of the previous night, the terror in a patient's eyes, the urgent code blue, and that final liberating beep as a stubborn clot finally dislodged. It was just past 9. The courtroom hummed with activity, lawyers rustling papers, hushed whispers from a few jurors. Some glanced her way, then quickly averted their gaze. She knew this reaction. People always noticed a black woman in an unexpected place, dressed inappropriately. Angela moved silently towards the witness stand, her hospital badge still clipped to her pocket. No time to change, no time to process. She hadn't slept in 18 hours, yet she was here. Truth, after all, doesn't wait. Then a thunderous voice broke the quiet. "Miss Whitman," Judge Ronald Pritchard intoned without even glancing up from his monitor, "is that what you consider proper attire for my courtroom?" Heads swiveled. The atmosphere shifted palpably. A few individuals leaned forward, captivated. Angela halted mid-stride. "I apologize, Your Honor," she responded, her voice unwavering. "I came directly from my shift. I didn't want to be late." Judge Pritchard finally met her gaze, his eyebrows raised. His tone sharpened. "This is a courtroom, not a hospital. You are here to testify, not to work an ER show. Show some respect." It was loud, public, deliberate. Angela felt the sting, not just the raw embarrassment, but that familiar ache of being singled out, not for who she was, but for failing to conform to someone else's rigid definition of what was proper. She inhaled slowly and deeply, then took another resolute step forward. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she stated, her voice steady, "I've just come from helping save the life of a stroke patient who arrived with mere minutes to spare. My scrubs are not disrespectful. They embody every person I've fought to keep alive. Some of them ended up in this very courthouse because people had abandoned them." Silence descended. A bailiff glanced uncertainly at the judge, unsure whether to intervene. An elderly man in the back folded his arms, observing intently. You could almost hear every rustle cease. Angela continued, her hands clasped before her. She didn't need volume, her words cut cleanly. "I'm not here to make a fashion statement. I'm here because someone in that hospital was neglected, and the truth matters more than what I'm wearing." For a few suspended seconds no one stirred. Not even the judge. Then came the unexpected sound. A single pair of hands clapping. Then another. And another. Within moments half the room rose to their feet. Not in protest, but in profound response to something authentic, something profoundly honest. Angela didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply took her seat at the witness stand and waited, eyes fixed straight ahead. Judge Pritchard looked down, adjusted his robe, took a needless sip of water. The bailiff remained silent. But beneath Angela's composure lay a narrative no one in that room yet comprehended. It was time to grasp the depth of what those scrubs had already witnessed. Transition. 12 hours earlier. 12 hours earlier, Angela Whitman leaned over a stretcher at UAB Hospital in Birmingham, Alabama, her fingers pressing fiercely against a man's wrist, desperately seeking a pulse that was fading. "Clot in the left hemisphere," the attending physician had yelled. "Page neurology stat." Angela didn't falter. She grabbed the crash cart with one hand and the patient's chart with the other. His name was Jerry, 61, incoherent upon arrival, drooling, half his face slack like crumpled paper. He was fortunate someone found him in time, but luck alone isn't enough. You need people who truly care. "BP's dropping," Angela called out, adjusting the 4. "We need to move now." She was 3 hours into her shift when Jerry arrived, 9 hours ago. The night had been a relentless blur of blaring alarms, blood draws, a code blue in room 12B, and a mother's heartbreaking collapse at 4 a.m. Most nights were like this. Barely time to eat, certainly no time to sit. But that morning, something within Angela refused to clock out. She had received the court summons 2 weeks prior. A patient had been admitted after a fall at a nursing home. The bruises didn't align with the story, and Angela noticed. She meticulously documented everything. Her comprehensive report had triggered the investigation. Now she had to testify, not for herself but for the woman who couldn't speak. Angela peeled off her gloves and scrubbed her hands until the water ran cold. She checked the patient board. Jerry was stable, neurology had taken over. Her body yearned to collapse, but the clock read 7:52 a.m. If she left now, she could just barely make it. She quickly ran a comb through her hair in the break room mirror, wiped an antiseptic smear from her sleeve, and grabbed her tote bag. No time for makeup, no time for proper shoes, no time to iron anything. She pulled on her hoodie, tucked her ID into her pocket and headed for the staff elevator. A fellow nurse, Cassie, was brewing coffee. "You okay?" she inquired. Angela offered a weary half-smile. "Court. Neglect case. Like that woman from 8C. Angela nodded. "Go get 'em," Cassie encouraged. "Make it count." The walk to the parking garage felt unusually long. Her legs were heavy, her shoulders unconsciously slumped forward. At the crosswalk, she caught her reflection in the outpatient wing's glass window. Tired, older than 34, and in a uniform that felt less like clothing and more like armor. Traffic was light. She hit every green light. It felt as if the city was granting her passage, unaware of the stakes involved. When she pulled into the courthouse parking lot, she gazed at the building for a long moment. Concrete, towering glass windows, American flags snapping stiffly in the wind. Looked sterile, familiar in a different way. She took a deep breath and stepped out. No change of clothes, no moment to reset. Just her and the night's lingering imprints. The ache in her knees, the faint scent of iodine, and the conviction that she hadn't arrived empty-handed. Her testimony wouldn't be theatrical, just facts plainly presented. But her presence, her scrubs, would speak first. She hoped it wouldn't be an issue. But the courtroom didn't share her hope. The judge's reaction wasn't merely about protocol. It was personal, steeped in history, a history about to reveal itself. Courtroom. Testimony continues. Angela sat upright in the witness chair, her hands neatly folded in her lap. The murmur of applause had receded, but the energy it had ignited lingered. People were observing her differently now. Some with newfound respect, some with quiet embarrassment, others with an eager curiosity, wondering what else this woman was about to reveal. Judge Ronald Pritchard hadn't uttered a word since the applause erupted. His gavel remained untouched. He adjusted his collar, cleared his throat, then attempted to reclaim control. "This courtroom," he began slowly, "will maintain order and professionalism, regardless of applause." His voice no longer resonated with its previous authority. Something had shifted. Angela maintained eye contact, calm yet attentive. The prosecuting attorney, Bethany Quinn, rose and approached the center, her heels tapping softly across the floor. She nodded towards Angela, not with sympathy but with a quiet acknowledgement. "Miss Whitman," she said, "can you tell the court what you observed on the night of April 3rd? Angela didn't hesitate. "I was assigned to the ER. The patient, Ms. Loretta Daniels, arrived from Restview Senior Care, transferred by ambulance. She had a broken hip and multiple contusions, arms, ribs, temple." She paused, allowing the image to sink into everyone's minds. Her vitals were unstable, blood pressure low. She was dehydrated. She hadn't been turned in her bed in quite some time. You could see the pressure sores along her back and elbows, stage 2, maybe stage 3. "I've encountered this before. I understood its implications." Bethany nodded. "And what did you do next?" "I asked the medics what they were told upon picking her up. They stated the nurse on duty claimed she fell while attempting to get up on her own." Angela looked straight ahead, her voice unwavering. But Miss Daniels was nonverbal. She had advanced dementia. She couldn't walk, she couldn't stand. A soft gasp emanated from someone in the gallery. Angela continued, "I asked the medics to document their findings. I called my supervisor and requested to file an internal report. I stayed late that night to speak with the charge nurse and initiate a formal incident record." Bethany glanced at the jury. "Did you believe the nursing home staff were telling the truth?" "No," Angela stated plainly. "And neither did the paramedics." A ripple of silence spread across the courtroom. The defense attorney, a man named Grant Bellamy, rose and raised his hand. "Objection, speculation." Judge Pritchard hesitated. "Sustained," he said quietly, almost regretfully. Angela didn't flinch. She had conveyed what needed to be conveyed. Bethany pressed on. Miss Whitman, why did you stay late that night? Angela turned to the jury now. Because Loretta Daniels had no one else. No family showed up, no friends. Just me and the two medics. And I couldn't go home without putting something down in writing. I couldn't. That sentence landed with the weight of a stone. Grant shifted in his seat. Bethany returned to her table, leafing through her notes, though she barely seemed to consult them. Angela looked towards Judge Pritchard. I didn't come here for applause, she said gently, and I didn't come here to be praised for doing what should be normal. I just want people to stop pretending that what happened to Ms. Daniels was anything short of wrong. The room held its breath once more. The jury, 12 strangers drawn from across Jefferson County, appeared more engaged now, more human. Pritchard adjusted his glasses. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally he leaned back and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of approval but of acknowledgement. Angela had shifted the atmosphere twice now, not by raising her voice, not by tearing anyone down, but by speaking the truth unapologetically. But as the judge sat in silence, something in his expression suggested this wasn't the first time he'd been challenged, and perhaps that was what troubled him most. Judge Pritchard's internal monologue. Ronald Pritchard had presided on the bench for nearly 22 years. Before that, he'd spent a decade as a prosecutor and prior to that 6 years in the Marine Corps. Discipline, order, protocol. That was his world. You spoke when spoken to. You dressed by the rules. You adhered to the chain of command. And if you didn't, you were out of line. He was born in 1961 in Meridian, Mississippi, the middle son of a steel worker and a schoolteacher. His father was the kind of man who shined his shoes before going to the grocery store. If Ronald came to the table without tucking in his shirt, dinner was over before it began. As a young man, he learned that respect wasn't just expected. It had to be explicitly displayed, visibly, in the way you spoke, the way you looked, the way you dressed. So when Angela Whitman entered his courtroom in hospital scrubs, he didn't see a nurse who had just worked all night. He saw a direct challenge to everything he'd been taught about what dignity looked like. But what Judge Pritchard didn't know was what those scrubs signified to her, or the sheer fortitude it took for her to wear them through that courtroom door without shame. He also didn't know that years ago his own wife, Nadine, had been rushed to an ER with heart palpitations. He never learned the nurse's name, but she stayed 2 hours past her shift to monitor her. He recounted that story once at a dinner party, praising the young lady who really gave a damn. But he never considered what she might have been wearing. Now, as he observed Angela seated on the witness stand, composed, deliberate, exhausted but unyielding, something gnawed at him. He remembered his time in the Marines, how corpsmen in bloodied fatigues toiled through the night without complaint. He never questioned their uniforms, he respected their grit. So why now was he scrutinizing someone who clearly lived her life on the same battlefield, simply in different colors? He shifted in his chair. Angela hadn't uttered another word since the last question. She sat quietly, hands still folded, not fidgeting, maintaining eye contact. No smugness, no smirk, just profound presence. It reminded him of something he had once told a clerk who showed up late and disheveled. People notice everything. If you don't control how you show up, they'll write your story before you even open your mouth. But Angela had opened her mouth and she'd rewritten the room. Still, pride is a stubborn thing to relinquish, especially when it's been ingrained by decades of being consistently right. His clerk, Nathan Greer, leaned towards him and whispered, "You okay, Pritchard?" Pritchard gave a tight nod, more to end the conversation than to answer. Because deep down something about this moment felt profoundly wrong. He didn't feel disrespected. He felt exposed, as if the sharpness of his own words had revealed more about him than about her. And there it was again. That image of the ER nurse who had once helped his wife, a woman with tired eyes, calloused hands and a quiet, urgent competence that didn't require applause. Angela reminded him of her. He hadn't thought about that night in years, but now he couldn't stop. And still she hadn't moved. She wasn't grandstanding, she wasn't pleading. She had simply walked in, spoken the truth and allowed the truth to carry the weight. Judge Pritchard looked down at the bench, then back at her. He cleared his throat again, but this time his voice was softer. "Miss Whitman, thank you for your testimony." Angela simply nodded once, respectfully. No smugness, just quiet gratitude. But what Angela didn't yet know was that her presence hadn't just challenged a room. It had profoundly shaken a man who believed he knew everything about respect. Defense, cross-examination, and verdict. Bethany Quinn rose again, giving Angela a brief look of both gratitude and encouragement. He turned to the jury. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Pritchard gave a nod, more controlled now, as if he'd regained a piece of his usual rhythm. The defense attorney, Grant Bellamy, rose from his chair with a faint sigh, tugging at his cuffs as if preparing for a routine dental cleaning. He approached the witness stand slowly, flashing the kind of grin Angela had seen a dozen times before. Polite, dismissive, and just a little too self-assured. "Miss Whitman," he began, pausing to fold his hands theatrically, "you're clearly passionate about your work, but would you agree that passion doesn't always equate to accuracy?" Angela blinked once. "I believe passion can keep people honest. I also believe it doesn't replace facts." Grant nodded, the grin still in place. "You've been a nurse for how long?" "Almost 10 years. And in that time, have you ever made a mistake on a chart?" Angela leaned forward slightly. "Of course. Every professional has. But not when it comes to a woman who can't speak for herself and ends up with a broken hip and bruises from a care facility." A couple of jurors tilted their heads at that. Grant pressed on. "You said the patient was nonverbal, so how can you be certain that her injuries weren't the result of an accident?" Angela didn't look away. "Because I've worked with dementia patients for years. Loretta Daniels had limited mobility, she was bedbound. The bruises on her arms suggested she was grabbed, pulled. The hip fracture wasn't from a fall. It was a forced break." "You're not a forensic expert, are you?" "No," Angela replied. "But I know the human body when it's hurt by carelessness." Grant shifted gears. "So your opinion is based on instinct?" "No," she said. "It's based on patterns, experience. You see enough of something, it stops being an accident and starts looking like a choice." There it was again, that room-wide pause that followed every time Angela spoke without trying to impress anyone. Grant stepped back. He tapped his pen against the table. "No further questions." Angela was excused. She stepped down, quiet and steady, returning to her seat behind Bethany. Several eyes followed her, not just because of what she'd said, but because of the way she had said it. The next 2 witnesses were called, but the temperature in the courtroom had irrevocably changed. Testimonies came and went, but Angela's words hung in the air like an unyielding smoke. 2 days later, closing arguments concluded. The jury deliberated for just over 3 hours. When they returned with a verdict, the courtroom was packed once more. Guilty. Negligence and abuse confirmed. The representative from Restview Senior Care slumped in his chair. The nursing supervisor on duty the night Loretta was injured barely looked up. Angela wasn't in the room for the verdict. She had returned to work. Another stroke patient, another set of charts, another woman in room 14A who reminded her of someone else. Bethany called her that evening. "They found them guilty," she said. Angela didn't cheer. She didn't breathe a sigh of relief. She simply said, "Good." There was a pause. "You changed the case, Angela," Bethany added. "Your testimony. People listened." Angela smiled faintly. Then it was worth the scrubs. Aftermath and ripple effect. But what Angela didn't anticipate was how that single courtroom appearance would follow her back into her world. Not with criticism, but with quiet gratitude from strangers who had simply been watching. 3 days after the verdict, Angela was back on the 4th floor of UAB Hospital, charting vitals and navigating a chaotic mix of 4 alarms and a diabetic patient who persistently tried to pull out his line. The courtroom already felt distant, like a weird, surreal episode she'd stepped into and then quietly departed. She hadn't told anyone at work about the moment with the judge. If they saw it on the news, no one mentioned a word. But something had shifted, not just in the courtroom but in how the world outside began to perceive her. It started with a message on her work phone, a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Whitman, this is Deborah Chambers. I'm Judge Pritchard's clerk. He asked me to reach out. He'd like to speak with you privately if you're open to it." Angela read the message twice, unsure if she wanted to respond at all. She didn't immediately, not out of anger but because she didn't see the point. What would he say? Sorry? That wouldn't be enough, and honestly she didn't need it. But the next morning, a different kind of encounter found her. A woman in her mid-50s with gray-streaked curls, holding a folded denim jacket, was waiting by the elevators. Angela had just finished a double shift, her eyes stung from the hallway light's brightness. "Excuse me," the woman said quietly, "are you Angela Whitman?" Angela blinked, her hand still on the elevator button. "Yes. I didn't want to bother you, I was in the courtroom last week. I was sitting in the back. I wasn't part of the case, I just came for a different hearing, but I stayed when I heard what you said." Angela tilted her head, unsure where this was leading. The woman took a breath. 3 months ago my son collapsed at home. Heart condition we didn't know he had. He was brought here. I don't remember much, but I remember there was a nurse who stayed with him. She wore blue scrubs and had her hair pulled back the same way. Angela froze, her breath catching. "You were that nurse," the woman said. "I remember your voice." Angela's throat tightened, she didn't know what to say. The woman stepped closer. "I never got to thank you. But hearing you speak in that courtroom, it made me realize you're not just saving lives, you're forcing people to see it. And that matters." Angela finally managed to speak. "How's your son?" "Good," the woman said, smiling through misty eyes. "He's starting school again next week." They stood there in the hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, neither needing to say much more. Angela made it to her car that morning and sat for a while, her head against the steering wheel, not crying, just tired. But this time the tiredness felt meaningful. Later that week she finally called Deborah Chambers back. They met in a quiet side room at the courthouse. Judge Pritchard entered with a folder in one hand and a coffee in the other. He didn't waste time. "I came from a world where respect looked a certain way," he said, not quite sitting down yet. "I thought I understood what it meant. But I watched that courtroom stand up for you and I realized maybe I was wrong." Angela didn't say anything, just waited. "I didn't mean to humiliate you," he added, "but I did. And I owe you an apology that doesn't hide behind courtroom language." Angela nodded once. "Thank you." He looked relieved that she didn't make it more complicated. "I've been a judge a long time," he said, "but I think I just learned more in 15 minutes than I have in 15 years. Angela gave a small smile. "Well, I've had worse shifts." He laughed at that and then quietly left. But the conversation didn't end there. Not in Angela's life and not in the lives of the people who witnessed something they couldn't forget. Angela didn't become famous, she didn't go viral. There were no book deals or interviews on morning TV. And that was fine with her. She didn't need a spotlight, just enough light to be seen. A week after the case ended, a young nursing student named Marisol stopped her in the hospital cafeteria. She looked barely 20, still carrying a thick textbook and wearing the kind of oversized hoodie you only take off when absolutely forced to. "Miss Whitman?" she asked cautiously. Angela looked up from her tray. "Yes. I just wanted to say I was in the courtroom too. My cousin was part of another case that day. I didn't mean to sit in yours, I just stayed because..." She trailed off, nervous. "You made me think about why I'm even doing this." Angela motioned for her to sit. "You ever question it?" Marisol nodded. "A lot." Angela shrugged. "Good. The day you stop questioning it is the day you stop doing it right." They talked for 10 minutes about patients, burnout, school, how people see nurses as background noise until they need them, and then expect them to be heroes without ever being human. As Marisol stood to leave, she turned back. "Thank you for not changing before court." Angela smiled. "Didn't have time." "No," Marisol said softly, "that's what made it matter." Moments like that didn't come every day, but when they did, they stuck. Not like awards or titles, more like scars that remind you why you kept going when you were exhausted and no one said thank you. Angela went back to work the next day and the one after that. Night shifts, blood pressure drops, tears behind privacy curtains. Sometimes she'd catch someone staring at her ID badge a little longer. Sometimes a visitor would stop and say, "You were in that case, weren't you?" And she'd just nod quietly. She never traded in the scrubs for something safer. She still walked into rooms with dried saline on her sleeves. She still pressed fingers to fading pulses. Still listened to stories patients whispered at 3 a.m. when they thought no one else cared. But she carried herself differently now. Not louder, just more certain. One evening, while chatting in the nurse's station, Cassie leaned over and said, "You know, you scared the hell out of that judge." Angela chuckled. "He needed it." "You think he'll ever forget it?" Angela thought about that. "I hope not. Some stories aren't about spectacle. They're about quiet revolutions. The kind that happen when one person refuses to shrink, when one woman shows up exactly as she is, unpolished, unbent, and unashamed. Angela didn't have to raise her voice. She just had to speak with the same clarity she used when calling out a heart rhythm. Steady, direct, and with no room for doubt. Respect doesn't come from clothes or titles or how long you've been in the room. It comes from how you carry the weight no one else wants to lift. And Angela had carried it for years. The patience, the reports, the impossible nights. She didn't need applause to keep going. She just needed to know someone was listening. So the next time someone questions how a nurse looks or walks or speaks, maybe they'll remember that courtroom, that silence, that clap. Maybe they'll remember Angela Whitman and think twice. Because sometimes, the strongest voice in the room is the one that speaks last without yelling and still manages to change everything.